Taungar ngatu wandera yurangai. Helen Ipaldorin Namungarag Yurangal Mayu Milka Dundato. Danny, Silas, Reggie, Birdie, Willie Yurangai Mayu Wawadirko Dunko Yuran Dumbo Wamino Bujil Nadino Mangandaman. Gura Mayu Gungara, Wara Kalakali Yuretipara, Garkubira Nama, Ganda Nama, Kurugarago. I will switch into English so that I can speak to the rest of the assembled friends, relations, and visitors to Cooktown. I'm sending you very distant greetings, Gungaran from the far north. And I'm very, very sorry I can't be there with you today to celebrate the launching of this new edition of the storybook MILBI. When Tulo and I started this work on the collection of stories, the first edition of MILBI, now more than 40 years ago, we hoped, but I think we never really expected that we would see another edition of the book with the stories told in the real language in which they were originally told, in the Gugu Yimithir language, which is the true language of Gangar, the town of Cooktown, and of the whole region of the Endeavour River. We talked about the book then, and we spent a lot of time talking also about another book with Tulo's childhood friend, Roger. And we talked a lot about the nature of the stories. There were lots of telling and retelling of the stories and about the paintings that Tulo would make to illustrate them. So what I'd like to do with the few minutes I'm going to spend with you today is mostly share Tulo's own words and images with you. So first I'm going to pass on before you a little snippet of edited film from 1982 when Tulo, Roger, and a bunch of other friends and relations who have now all departed from this world, I'll say their names, although there is some sense in which I probably shouldn't. But I assume some of you will know who I'm talking about. They included Bob, Leo, my Uncle Jellicoe, the late Pastor George, and his wife Maud. And we really did serious bush bashing. We left, this is back in the early 1980s. We reopened a trail that Pastor George had himself probably originally bulldozed a couple of decades before, and had hardly been passed through since then, up past the Starkey River, crossing having to winch our way across the Ginny River, going on to Akuga Station, and then ultimately on to Cape Owen and to Cape Melville. Very, very far from the Endeavour River, which was Tulo's own home country and where most of the stories in this book have their provenance, but nonetheless very close to and right passing through other story places that are mentioned here. And as a result, we had a lot of chance, and so we were thinking a lot about the book at the time, and we had a lot of chance to talk about these stories and who was in it. So the first clip I'm going to play for you is a video from that morning in Wakuga Station in 1982, when Tulo got up and served himself a cup of tea. And we talked a little bit about the nature of the stories and the characters in them. So that will be the first clip that I will show you.
Ah iya, betul penajinya ditengker lagi. Most of the Western people with a story come to. They almost like Ngantano. You don't ever have Ngantano story. Talk with this what you call a storm or a wood pump. Nardal, wagtail, bunjol,
Wunar.
all them. All the stories will come in on it.
You can find them in every bamay.
You find it everywhere.
Urpalulo, Jaramali,
Bunjol,
Wanda,
only those fellas.
On an earlier trip, Tulo and I drove south down the Queensland coast all the way to Canberra, where the first book was completed and then later launched. And in fact, all the way to Melbourne, where we went to try to rescue some abandoned relatives who made their way down there. And Tulo again took up pen and paper at that time to write in his carefully Lutheran-schooled handwriting about his life. I asked him to think about customs and to try to set some stage for the stories and the customs of the old people from whom these stories were drawn. So I'd like to read now just a small segment of what he wrote at that time. This comes from a trip south that we made in 1980. Thousands of years ago, long before the white people came to this country, the Aboriginal people lived in this country. They roamed freely in search of meat and food. They owned 20 or 30 square miles of land for their families, hunting ground, tribal land, as it's now called. They too had their own problems, fighting and killing one another for disobeying customs, law, and sacred places. Many years after the white people had arrived in this country, now called Australia, many changes took place. Aboriginal people were sent away to missions and government settlements from their fathers' homelands. They fretted and longed to go back in their tribal land where they could roam freely. But cares, worries, sickness took over, and they died. Nowadays, as we look past and present, the new generations don't know or are even told about the past. Of course, the old people are gone with their customs, law, and sacred places. In the past, trouble arose between the white people, the settlers, and the Aboriginal. The farmers needed the Aboriginal free laborers. The station owners who owned cattle and horses, they needed Aboriginals too to work for them. Some good to them, some not. Hundreds of Aboriginal people were around places where the station owners and the farmers had their properties, frightening cattle and horses. The Aboriginal people still took it for their hunting grounds. I was born in 1922 at Spring Hill Station. Before I went to school, I went out hunting, slept with the old people, and I learned from them stories and legends and sacred places. And things were handed down to me by spoken words, not by book. Some of it I remember, it's down in this story. Some I've forgotten, only remember bits and pieces, sorry to say. In future, anybody may read this story. Hope they enjoy it. And now let me pass to Tulo, talking to Roger and Bob as we camped at Cape Melville back in 1982 to give Tulo the last word on this subject. And I've enjoyed being with you. Thanks very much.
Huh? I don't think many that what you're asking.
I think banana is right. That we're not asking not government for the whole of Australia or one state. Just a little block by the side of white man. Little area what is given to us before. Although it's not a farming land, still a hunting ground. The land what will be given to us, we can do what we like. Whether we want to work the ground is every individual's thinking. If you want to breed cattle on it, if you want to run a fish on it, if you want to run a farm, if you want a scrub farm, that's it. But the whole land is given to us. Play just a little bit.
Not can be gone too far into
Queensland.
Not
the whole Queensland.
No more.
We're not asking the whole of Queensland. Just talking under freedom, what you talk with that, his own business. I can't tell you, no, and you're not going to fish random, you do this, you do. I can't give you order, and you can't give me order.
Well, it's now.
I can't give this fellow orders. What are you going to do? No.